Before power was measured in market share, it was measured in territory. Let's review the ultimate strategists. Modern organizations assume authority must be centralized to prevent chaos, but the most resilient military force in ancient history proved the opposite. The Roman legion did not collapse when its commander died in battle. It did not stall when messages were delayed across difficult terrain. This was not accident. This was deliberate organizational design. The structure that created this resilience centered on one figure, the centurion. A Roman centurion was not a bureaucrat. He was not a staff officer processing paperwork at headquarters. He stood in the mud with the century he commanded. He watched the enemy's formations shift. He decided how his soldiers would respond in that moment, not waiting for authorization from distant headquarters. Yet he was not acting alone or in defiance of Rome's command. His autonomy existed within a carefully designed structure. The system made decentralized command possible. This is not a story of individual genius or charisma. It is the story of how an organization structured authority so that power could move through it rapidly, without waiting for approval at the center. Modern organizations face a recurring problem. Authority is centralized. Every decision waits for approval. The person at the top becomes a bottleneck. Speed suffers. Responsiveness dies. A sales team cannot respond to a competitor's move without committee approval. A production manager cannot adjust workflow to unexpected supply disruption without executive sign-off. This is not caution. It is organizational paralysis. The stakes are real. In a volatile market, the organization that acts first often sets the terms for everyone else. The organization that waits often loses. The assumption is that decentralization creates chaos. That if you let people decide on their own, the organization becomes fragmented and incoherent. Rome proved this assumption wrong. Rome faced an enemy that could field forces anywhere across its territory. Speed of response determined survival. Rome could not afford centralized decision-making. Its structure had to evolve. The question becomes, how can an organization grant genuine authority to intermediate decision-makers without losing coherence or creating competing agendas? Rome's answer was the centurion. A Roman centurion commanded approximately 80 to 100 soldiers called a century. The name derived from the number, not the other way around. This was the basic tactical unit of the legion. The centurion was not appointed from the aristocracy. He was promoted from the ranks. He had fought. He had survived. His soldiers knew his competence firsthand. This mattered. Unlike modern officers who might be rotated from an administrative desk, the centurion lived among his century continuously. He experienced the same hardship, the same risk, the same conditions. The distinction matters. A leader making decisions from a position of distance often lacks the information available to someone actually present at the point of action. The centurion had both. Above the centurion stood the optio, a deputy who could assume command if the centurion fell. Above the optio stood the centurions who commanded cohorts, larger formations composed of multiple centuries. Above these stood the tribunes, officers appointed by Rome's military establishment, and at the top stood the legatus, the legion's overall commander, appointed by the emperor himself. The structure was hierarchical. Clear lines of authority ran from the emperor down through the legion. But within this hierarchy, distinct levels held genuine decision authority. This is the architectural secret. Each rank made decisions appropriate to its level. The centurion decided tactics. The tribune managed cohort coordination. The legatus held the overall battle strategy. No rank attempted to micromanage the level below. How was this autonomy actually granted? It began with clarity and communication. Every centurion understood the broader strategic intent that the legatus held. What was Rome trying to accomplish? Once the centurion understood the objective, he was not told how to achieve it. He was not given a step-by-step sequence. He was authorized to make decisions that advanced that objective. If the objective was to hold a position against a charge, the centurion could arrange his soldiers as he judged best. He could exploit the terrain. He could adjust formation based on enemy behavior. If the objective was to advance and secure a supply route, the centurion could choose the path and timing that matched what he observed, not what someone distant had predicted. The structural principle was this: authority was pushed as far toward the point of action as possible. Information was pushed the same direction. The centurion had both. But autonomy was not absolute. The centurion operated within three bounds. First, the strategic objective set by above. Second, coordination with adjacent centuries. Third, the chain of accountability. Coordination mattered because a century could not survive in isolation. It had to maneuver in concert with other centuries. This created interdependence. The system prevented fragmentation. The centurion could make tactical decisions, but not decisions that violated the coherence of the larger formation. If one century broke formation to pursue a retreating enemy, it exposed the line. The centurion understood this. The third bound was accountability. The centurion reported to the optio and the higher-ranking centurion. They observed outcomes, they maintained visibility, they intervened if the centurion's decisions threatened the broader battle. But this accountability was not punishment-based. The Roman military understood that fear of punishment would paralyze a leader in a moment requiring rapid decision. Accountability came after, not before. A centurion who made a sound decision and it resulted in losses was not executed. A centurion who refused to decide, hoping to avoid blame, was removed from command. The incentive structure mattered. This created what modern organizational theory calls psychological safety. A leader is willing to make decisions when he knows that reasonable decisions made in good faith will be supported, even if the outcome is not ideal. The Roman legion achieved this not through HR policies or wellness seminars. It achieved it through structural design. The centurion was trusted because the system trusted him explicitly. This trust was not naive. The system used visibility, communication, and selection to maintain it. The centurion who repeatedly made poor decisions would not remain a centurion for long. But the default was empowerment, not suspicion. This mattered. In a crisis, a centurion who felt trusted was far more likely to act decisively than one who felt surveilled. Where did this system fail? It did not fail everywhere, but the boundaries are visible. Decentralized command worked when battlefield conditions changed rapidly. It struggled when resources became scarce. Consider supply during a siege. Food was limited. The centurion could not decide to feed his troops more. This required central resource allocation. Rome's system remained hierarchical in supply. Decentralization had limits. Another limitation, scale. The Roman system worked at the level of the century and cohort. As Rome expanded into more territories, coordination became more difficult. The channels of communication themselves became bottlenecks. A third counterpoint. Not all Romans embraced this structure. Some commanders, insecure in their authority or ideologically committed to total control, attempted to centralize every decision. History records that these commanders often failed. Consider a validating case, the Punic Wars. Scipio Africanus defeated Hannibal in part because he trusted his subordinates. When conditions changed unexpectedly, his officers responded rather than waiting for orders from Rome. Hannibal, commanding Carthaginian forces, was a superior strategist. But Carthage's political structure often constrained his freedom. Rome's decentralized command structure at the tactical level allowed Scipio's forces to adapt. The system made the difference. Important distinction. Effectiveness and legitimacy are separate questions. Decentralized command made Rome's legions effective, but it did not prevent Rome from committing conquest and atrocity. The structure enabled tactical resilience, not moral justification. What did decentralized command enable? Speed. A legion facing an unexpected enemy maneuver did not need to wait for a messenger to reach Rome. It responded in the moment. Adaptability was constant. When difficult terrain prevented the planned formation, centurions reorganized their soldiers. When enemies deployed unexpected tactics, the century regrouped. Rigidity was not an option for survival. Morale. Soldiers served under officers they respected directly, not distant bureaucrats. A centurion's orders came from someone they had served alongside. Compliance flowed from respect, not fear. Retention. Men who believed their centurion would make sound decisions and not waste their lives re-enlisted. The legion's core remained stable. Institutional knowledge accumulated. Over decades, this created an organization that improved. Centurions learned from each other. Best practices spread. The legion's institutional competence grew. This compounding effect proved decisive over time. Rome did not dominate the Mediterranean because individual Romans were more physically powerful or smarter than their enemies. Rome dominated because it created an organization that learned and adapted. The centurion structure enabled this learning. Every battle taught lessons. These lessons moved through the chain of command and reshaped practice. The organization improved continuously. To the opening question, how can an organization grant genuine authority to intermediate leaders? Rome's answer was clarity, accountability, and trust. The centurion knew what he was defending and why. He had the authority to make the decisions that mattered at his level. He was held accountable for outcomes, but not punished for reasonable decisions made in good faith. This is how resilience emerged. The modern leadership question is not whether to centralize or decentralize absolutely. It is this: at what level should decisions actually be made to achieve your strategic objective? If the objective is speed, decisions must move toward the edge, toward the people who have the latest information. This is where the Roman centurion lived. If the objective is scale, you must design systems so that thousands of independent decisions still cohere into a unified direction. This requires clarity about what matters most. If the objective is learning, you must create channels so that lessons from one decision travel back to inform all future decisions. Rome did this through its hierarchy of reports and debriefs. The structural element Rome mastered was this: remove approval requirements for decisions that should be made locally. Replace approval with clarity about objectives and visibility of outcomes. This changes everything. Modern organizations often reverse this pattern. They require approval for decisions that should be made locally. Then they complain about sluggishness and missed opportunities. The structure itself created the bottleneck. The centurion teaches a different principle: clarity about what you are trying to accomplish, trust in the judgment of leaders close to the work, and accountability through visibility after decisions are made. This does not solve every organizational problem, but it transforms how quickly an organization can respond when conditions change rapidly, and decisive action determines outcomes. That is the centurion's legacy. Authority can move slowly through hierarchies, or it can flow to the people closest to the decision. The throne changes, the strategy remains. Until next time.